March 4th, 1944, 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The sky was a frozen battlefield. Condensation trails twisted like ghosts over the burning city below, where American B-17s droned forward in tight, trembling formation. The air was thick with black flak bursts, each one a blooming flower of death suspended in the thin, metallic air. From his cockpit in a Messerschmitt Bf 109G, Oberleutnant Karl Richter squinted through the frost-rimmed canopy. His oxygen mask hissed with every breath. Ahead, the bomber stream stretched for miles, dozens upon dozens of silver fortresses crawling across the sky toward the industrial heart of Germany. Richter keyed his radio. "All Staffel, target the stragglers. We'll break them before they reach Hanover," his wingman acknowledged, the clipped voice barely audible over the static. The Luftwaffe pilots dove from the sun, engines screaming, cannon barrels armed and ready. The plan was simple: hit the bombers hard, then pull back before the short-legged American fighters could catch them. Everyone knew the P-47 Thunderbolts and early P-38s didn't have the fuel to follow this deep into Germany. But something was wrong. As Richter lined up a shot on a straggling B-17, tracer fire streaked past his canopy, fast, precise, and coming from above. He jerked his stick hard left, pulling into a sharp roll. His eyes caught a flash of silver slicing through the air. A sleek, streamlined aircraft unlike any he had seen before. Its nose gleamed under the sunlight, and beneath its wings hung drop tanks glistening with condensation. "Was zum Teufel," he muttered. The American fighter banked gracefully, its laminar flow wings cutting effortlessly through the thin air. The Mustang's Merlin engine roared as it closed the distance, guns flashing in a deadly rhythm. Richter's wingman shouted over the radio, then went silent, his aircraft trailing smoke before disintegrating in a flash. Richter pulled into a steep dive, pushing his engine to the limit. The mysterious fighter followed effortlessly. He could almost feel its gun sight on his tail. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the Mustang broke off, returning toward the bomber stream like a shepherd guarding its flock. Breathing heavily, Richter leveled his aircraft. The American plane climbed back into formation, escorting the bombers as they turned for home. "It can't be," Richter whispered. "They can't have fighters this deep. It's propaganda, some trick." Back at base, pilots argued in disbelief. The Americans, they said, must be lying. No fighter could fly from England to central Germany and back, not at that range. But the truth was already in the sky above them, written in the elegant silhouette of a machine that would change the air war forever, the P-51 Mustang. 2 years earlier, April 1942, Inglewood, California. Inside North American Aviation's sprawling factory, the air hummed with the noise of rivet guns, rolling cranes, and the relentless rhythm of wartime urgency. Rows of young engineers hunched over drafting tables, their faces lit by the bluish glow of desk lamps. At the center of it all stood Edgar Schmood, a German-born designer with an unshakable obsession for efficiency and speed. The British had come to North America with a desperate request: build them a fighter, fast. The Royal Air Force needed a new plane to replace their aging Curtiss P-40s. Schmood promised something better, an aircraft that could fly faster, farther, and higher than anything before it. Within 117 days, the prototype, the NA-73X, was ready. Sleek and futuristic, it looked more like a racing machine than a warplane. Schmood's design introduced a revolutionary laminar flow wing, which dramatically reduced drag and gave the Mustang an aerodynamic grace that other fighters could only envy. But the first Mustangs, powered by the Allison engine, were limited. They performed well at low altitude but struggled above 15,000 feet, exactly where bomber crews needed protection. That limitation could have doomed the project, until a group of British test pilots made a bold suggestion. What if they replaced the Allison with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine? It was a marriage of genius. The moment the Merlin-powered Mustang took to the air, the transformation was immediate. Its climb rate, speed, and altitude performance skyrocketed. The test pilots returned wide-eyed, speechless, except for one exclamation: "It's perfect." By late 1943, the P-51 Mustang was entering production, and the U.S. Army Air Forces saw its potential. Finally, a fighter with the speed of a Spitfire and the legs to reach Berlin. Yet one more challenge remained: the range. Even the mighty Merlin couldn't carry the Mustang across half of Europe on internal fuel alone. The answer came in the form of drop tanks, sleek teardrop-shaped fuel containers slung beneath the wings, feeding the engine through a complex series of fuel lines. It was a simple idea executed with precision. The external tanks could be jettisoned once empty, allowing the Mustang to regain full agility in combat. The innovation seemed small, but it would alter the strategic landscape of the entire war. Back in the Luftwaffe's operations rooms, analysts began to notice strange reports. Enemy escort fighters sighted near Leipzig. P-51s over Hanover. American fighters engaging near Berlin. Each report was dismissed as an exaggeration, until the day the evidence became undeniable. March 6, 1944, morning over the English Channel. The roar of engines rolled across the airfields of East Anglia as hundreds of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators lifted into the pale dawn sky. Frost clung to the edges of the runways. Crews had been awake since midnight, their breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. Mechanics waved them off, watching as the endless formation climbed into the rising sun, each bomber carrying a deadly cargo bound for Berlin. Inside the lead B-17, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosie Rosenthal checked his map and shook his head in disbelief. Berlin. Until now, that name had meant certain death. Too deep. Too risky. No fighter escort had ever been able to follow them that far, not until today. Over the radio came a confident voice. "Red leader to all groups! Mustangs are with you today. We're taking this one all the way." The bomber crews cheered. Many didn't believe it, but they wanted to. For months, they'd watched their comrades vanish over Germany. Whole formations shredded by swarms of FW-190s and BF-109s once the escorts had to turn back. The term deep penetration missions had become a death sentence. But today, as the bombers crossed into occupied Europe, the promise became real. High above and slightly behind, the P-51 Mustangs glinted like silver falcons against the morning light. Their long-range drop tanks gleamed, their contrails merging with those of the bombers below. Hours later, as the formation reached central Germany, the Luftwaffe scrambled to intercept. Radar operators watched in confusion as the map lit up with incoming contacts. The initial wave of German fighters dove in with confidence, expecting the same easy prey as before. Then the Mustangs pounced. Captain Don Gentile of the 336th Fighter Squadron rolled his P-51 onto its back and dove from 30,000 feet, sunlight flashing across the polished metal. He picked out a BF-109 streaking toward the bomber stream and opened fire. His .650 caliber Brownings erupted in unison, tracers slashing across the sky. The German fighter exploded in a fiery bloom. "Splash one bandit," Gentile said calmly, pulling up into a climbing roll. "Let's keep the skies clean, boys." On the ground, Luftwaffe controllers were stunned. Fighters that should have been safe from interception were now being ambushed deep inside their own territory. Some German pilots refused to believe it, thinking perhaps these were new forward-based units operating from secret airfields in France. But when captured pilots were interrogated days later, they all told the same story. The Mustangs had followed them all the way to Berlin, and then home again. That day marked a turning point. The bombers dropped their loads over the heart of the Reich's capital for the first time with full escort protection. The psychological impact was as devastating as the bombs themselves. From that moment forward, the Luftwaffe's dominance was broken. The hunters of the sky had become the hunted. March 10, 1944, Luftwaffe Research and Development Headquarters, Berlin. The meeting room was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock and the distant rumble of anti-aircraft batteries. Blueprints, reconnaissance photos, and fragments of captured drop tanks lay scattered across the oak conference table. Major Hans Detmer, one of the Luftwaffe's top aviation engineers, leaned over the evidence, his brow furrowed. "Gentlemen," he said, "these were recovered near Bremen, The markings indicate American origin. They're aluminum, lightweight, disposable. He tapped a finger against a bullet-pocked fragment. And they were attached to the wings of fighters. Across from him, Colonel Ernst Bolle scoffed. Impossible. Those are from medium bombers, not single-engine planes. Detmer shook his head slowly. No, Herr Oberst. These came from fighters. The men who found them saw the aircraft. Slender, long-range models escorting bombers at 30,000 feet. The room erupted in disbelief. One officer laughed bitterly. Propaganda! The Americans are spreading rumors to boost morale. But the evidence was undeniable. Aerial photos showed unfamiliar aircraft flying in formation with bomber streams deep over German territory. The range was beyond anything the Luftwaffe had calculated possible. Detmer spread a technical report across the table. If these are indeed fighters, he said, pointing at the schematic, then the Americans have solved the range problem. Look, these tanks are designed to feed fuel directly into the main system, then detach once empty. Ingenious. They've essentially doubled their operational reach. A heavy silence fell over the room. Colonel Bolle stared out the window toward the gray Berlin skyline, smoke still drifting from the previous day's air raid. If what you're saying is true, he murmured, then there is no sanctuary left. No city, no factory, no rail line. They can reach anything. By April, reports flooded in from across the Reich. P-51s spotted over Leipzig, Munich, even Vienna. Allied fighters were now roaming German skies freely, strafing airfields, convoys, and trains with impunity. At the front lines, morale among Luftwaffe pilots began to crumble. They were losing not just aircraft, but control of the air itself. The Reich's vast industrial network, the lifeline of its war machine, was suddenly naked and exposed. In the engineering labs, Detmer and his team worked frantically to design long-range variants of their own fighters. They experimented with auxiliary fuel tanks, modifications to the FW-190, and plans for the Me-262 jet interceptor. But every test, every calculation led to the same grim realization. They were years behind. They've done what we said was impossible, Detmer admitted in a rare moment of candor. They've turned endurance into a weapon. And above them, day after day, the Mustangs roamed, escorting bombers, hunting Messerschmitts, and erasing the last illusions of Luftwaffe supremacy. June 1944, somewhere over northern France. The sky was alive with movement, streams of contrails twisting above the invasion fleet below. The D-Day landings had begun, and the air over Normandy was a blur of engines, gunfire, and vapor trails. Amid the chaos, the P-51 Mustang swept across the front like guardian angels. Captain John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group banked hard, his blue-nosed Mustang P-82 rolling through the clouds. Below, the beaches of Omaha were a patchwork of smoke and flame. Allied troops were clawing their way inland, and every minute they held depended on the skies remaining under American control. "Blue flight, keep it tight," Meyer called over the radio. "Nothing gets through to those beaches." Minutes later, a formation of Bf-109s attempted to dive through the cloud layer. The Mustangs caught them instantly. The German fighters never stood a chance. One by one, they were picked off as the agile P-51s circled like hawks. The balance of power had shifted completely. Where once the Luftwaffe dictated the terms of engagement, now they could barely get airborne without facing a swarm of long-range Mustangs. The Allied bombers that had once flown alone were now surrounded by these sleek, unrelenting protectors. For the Germans, the change was devastating. Veteran pilots were falling faster than they could be replaced. Fuel shortages crippled training programs, and every sortie carried the risk of destruction before even reaching altitude. Back at Allied bases in England, pilots spoke of the Mustang with reverence. It wasn't just a fighter, it was a lifeline. Its cockpit was cramped, its visibility excellent, its controls smooth as silk. Pilots loved how it felt, light, balanced, alive. Major George Preddy, one of the war's top Mustang aces, described it best after returning from a mission. "She's not just an airplane," he said, patting the side of his aircraft. She's the reason we're coming home." By late summer, Allied air superiority was absolute. The Luftwaffe, once feared as the finest air force in the world, was shattered. Factories that had built its might now lay in ruins. Trains, airfields, and supply lines were under constant attack from the very skies they once ruled. German intelligence finally confirmed what their engineers already knew. The P-51 Mustang's range was no myth, no propaganda. It was real. The drop tanks, the fuel system, the Merlin engine, all had combined to create a weapon of endurance that stretched across the entire continent. In the end, the Mustang had done more than protect bombers. It had strangled the Reich's ability to fight, ensuring that when the Allies landed in France, they did so under a sky they fully owned. As the sun set over the French coast, the Mustangs returned to base, their wings shimmering gold in the fading light. The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. "We used to fear the sky," one bomber crewman said quietly as he watched the P-51s glide overhead. "Now it belongs to us." The Mustang's legend had been forged in aluminum, fuel, and courage, and above all, in range.